No weapon, no motive, no connection, and no evidence. What exactly does this prosecution have? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to just go back to the basics of this Bryan Kohberger Idaho 4 case and what we're learning, or I should say what we're not learning, in these court hearings. Now, this entire case began in a very strange manner from the very beginning. 911 dispatch was not called for 8 hours after one of the roommates, Dylan, claims that she saw this assailant walk past her bedroom door as he was exiting the King Roadhouse. Now, in the exhibit to the PCA, it says that Dylan didn't state that she knew this individual. But that also means that she didn't state that she didn't know this individual either. A lot of people have said that because Dylan saw this individual, that's why law enforcement believed that there was only one male perpetrator. But just because Dylan only saw one individual walking past her bedroom door does not mean that there was not another one leaving out of the front door on the opposite side of that main room. So Dylan may not have seen what was going on behind this individual because if you remember correctly, she was in a state of frozen shock. So after she sees this intruder walk past her bedroom door and apparently goes into a state of frozen shock, she locks herself in her bedroom, which is probably the smart thing to do. You can't really blame her for that. But the problem is, she never calls for help. She never calls 911. Ever. The 911 call comes in at approximately noon, and it's made by someone who does not live at the King Roadhouse. But they did use Dylan's cell phone. Now, when this call is made, there's a group of people around this individual who's on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. And it's reported that this dispatcher speaks to a number of these individuals who are inside the crime scene. Now, so it wasn't a case of someone calling 911 and they were so hysterical that the dispatcher couldn't understand them and dispatches a unit for an unresponsive individual. This dispatcher talked to a number of people. So it's strange that this 911 call is logged in as a call for an unresponsive person. Because obviously anybody who was in this house who saw these victims knew why they were unresponsive. So that's kind of strange how that 911 call happened. The 8-hour delay to call 911 is what I believe caught all of our attention, especially once we found out that there were 2 roommates who were still alive inside this house. And they were also present at the time that these crimes were being committed. So this case started out in a very odd way. There's a lot of pieces to this entire case, including the investigation, that make absolutely no sense at all. Now, we have a suspect, Bryan Kohberger, and he's been in custody for a year and a half as they work through these court hearings. The question is, as we watch these court hearings, is what evidence does this prosecution even really have? As far as we're aware, there's still no weapon. Now, a lot of us believe that multiple weapons were used, because the wounds on these multiple victims do not match, which has been confirmed by Steve Gonsalves as well as the coroner. Of course, they found the sheath to a K-bar in the upstairs bedroom next to two of the victims. So, of course, we would just assume that that would be the weapon. But these wounds to some of the victims were described as large gouges, which would lead me to believe that one of the weapons used was a sharp-edged object, something heavy, maybe in the shape of a wedge, something with a handle, such as an axe, maybe a hatchet or a small camping axe. Something that could be swung from the handle, something that could generate a lot of force no matter who was swinging it. I believe that there were multiple attackers using multiple weapons. Investigators still have not confirmed exactly what type of weapon was used, other than that it was a sharp-edged object. They also haven't confirmed how many weapons were used. So it's very possible that they're aware that multiple weapons were used to commit this crime. Now, one thing that we haven't heard anything about is them finding any of these weapons. So as far as we know, investigators have not found any of these weapons. Now, something else that the prosecution does not have is a connection between Bryan Kohberger and these victims. They have still, after a year and a half, yet to find a connection. We have not seen any proof or any information that would lead us to believe that Bryan Kohberger knew anyone who lived at the King Roadhouse. And trust me, a lot of people are out there combing through this case with a fine-tooth comb. If there was somebody on a security camera with a ketchup stain on their shirt the size of a dime, we've seen it. So why can't we find a connection after a year and a half? Why haven't investigators established a connection after this long? Bryan Kohberger was not following these victims on the fake social media account. He wasn't stalking any of these victims, which was confirmed by Bill Thompson. And he wasn't in a fraternity or part of the Greek lifestyle at all. So what would Bryan Kohberger's connection be to the people in this house? He was almost 10 years older than all of these victims. This leads us into something that I believe is going to be crucial in this trial. And that is, what was Bryan Kohberger's motive to commit these heinous crimes? Investigators and the prosecution still do not have a motive. Now, can he be convicted without it? Of course, I think it's possible. But in my opinion, this jury is going to want to see a thorough presentation from this prosecution that would include a motive for Bryan Kohberger to commit these crimes. Don't let the small town courtroom environment fool you. This is a capital case, and Bryan Kohberger's life is on the line. So this is an extremely important part of this trial. What was the motivation for him to commit these crimes? Was it narcotics? Was it a crime of passion? Was it revenge or jealousy? Or was it that maybe he just wanted to see if he could pull this crime off? Without knowing the reason as to why he committed these crimes, it goes back to the connection, because we don't have a connection. So we don't have a connection or a motive, which basically would mean that a total stranger went to a house on King Road that he wasn't familiar with to take the lives of 4 strangers. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to not have a connection and not have a motive. It doesn't make sense that this college student would just go into this random house and start taking a bunch of strangers' lives for no reason. So yeah, I really think that this jury is going to need this connection and this motive in order to convict this defendant. Now, this was a very complex, as it was described, investigation involving multiple agencies on the local, state, and federal level. Steve Gonsalves stated in an interview that there was going to be a lot of digital evidence and technology used to solve this case and to convict this defendant. There was a lot of focus in the media about these multiple law enforcement agencies that were working together and working around the clock to solve this case. Now, these hearings are happening right now, and they've been happening. And this prosecution still does not have their evidence. Who shows up to court without proof to back up your claims? Without the evidence, it's all just baseless claims. Bill Thompson and the state are saying that they're still waiting for the evidence from the feds, who don't really seem like they want to give it up to the prosecution. So, is Bill Thompson getting hung out to dry? Is this prosecution in a bind? Because guaranteed, they're going to need this evidence if they're going to convict Bryan Kohberger. How does the prosecution go to trial without the ability to prove their allegations? We don't even know if this evidence exists. Is it possible that the evidence that the feds have doesn't jive with the state's narrative, and they're just finding that out right now? This could be a really bad situation for Bill Thompson and the prosecution. Meanwhile, you have Moscow Police Department patting themselves on the back and congratulating each other for their success in this Idaho 4 investigation. How? This investigation was a mess in the very beginning. Right now, their prosecutor is drowning due to insufficient evidence, and the PCA is completely falling apart. So what is good about this investigation? They don't have the weapon. They don't have a connection between the suspect and the victims. They don't have a motive for why the suspect would have committed these crimes. And they don't have all of the evidence. So this isn't looking good for the prosecution. And it definitely isn't looking good for the investigators who worked on this case. The weapon, the motive, the connection, and the evidence are all things that, in my opinion, this prosecution is going to need to convict Bryan Kohberger. Because at the end of the day, it's going to all come down to what the jury wants to see. And in my opinion, a jury in a capital case is going to want to see these things. They're going to want to see a thorough investigation. Just my opinion. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for my next video, and we'll see you next time.